It seems like there's been a lot of controversy lately about the prevalence of spicy romance books on social media, especially on TikTok. Seems like there are a lot of people out there who love spicy romances, but there are also a lot of people who don't and don't like the way that so many people promote such books. On top of that, I've also been seeing in the news that there is a growing movement of book banning and censorship across the United States, especially in regards to spicy novels. All of this gave me the idea that as an avid reader myself, I want to do a deep dive into the history of spice in books and in society as a whole. So I decided to do a lot of research and create this video. Welcome to my first video essay on my BookTube channel, The Evolution of Literary Censorship, from Scandal to Mainstream. Hi, my name is Moana, and this is my reading buddy Spike, and I am a reading and writing lover who disliked English class as both a student and a teacher, and I am now documenting my journey of rediscovering my love for words. Spiky loves words too, right? Want to say anything? Anything to say? No. Imagine a world where describing a kiss could land you in jail, where suggesting romantic attraction could destroy your career, where writing about love could get your book burned. This wasn't centuries ago. This was barely a lifetime past. And the journey from there to here tells us as much about ourselves as it does about the books that shaped us. In 1857, a French court put a book on trial. The crime? Describing a woman's unhappy marriage and subsequent affairs. The book was Madame Bovary, and its author, Gustave Flaubert, faced imprisonment for outrage to public morality. Let's look at one of the scandalous passages that shocked 19th century readers. She abandoned herself to him, her soul filled with that enchantment that comes with fulfilled desire. That's it. That's what could destroy a writer's career in 1857. Compare this to any contemporary romance novel, and you might wonder what all the fuss was about. But this gap between what shocked then and what we accept now is exactly our story. The Victorian era established strict controls on literary content through the Obscene Publications Act of 1857. This law became the blueprint for literary censorship across the English-speaking world, affecting everything from serious literature to penny dreadfuls. Even Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, now considered one of America's greatest poetic works, led to him losing his government job. His crime? Writing lines like, "The body of my love, the body of the woman I love, the body of the man, the body of the earth." Can you believe that words like these at that time were considered scandalous? When we read them now, they seem like nothing compared to some of the romance novels that we see today. But the real battle for literary freedom began in the early 20th century. In 1922, James Joyce's Ulysses was banned in both Britain and America. A copy was even burned by the US Post Office. Today, it's required reading in universities worldwide. The book's final chapter, Molly Bloom's Soliloquy, was considered so scandalous that even literary magazines wouldn't print it. Today, its stream of consciousness style is celebrated as revolutionary, its frank discussion of female sexuality praised rather than condemned. The mid-20th century marked a turning point. The paperback revolution brought books to the masses, and with it came new challenges to old restrictions. In 1960, Penguin Books was put on trial for publishing D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. The prosecutor famously asked if this was the kind of book you would wish your wife or servants to read. The jury took just 3 hours to decide that yes, actually it was. The verdict changed publishing forever. The 1970s brought another revolution. Feminist authors claiming their right to write about sexuality from a female perspective. Erica Jong's Fear of Flying introduced the concept of the zipless to literary discussion, while Anais Nin's elegant erotica gained mainstream recognition. Jong wrote, "The zipless is absolutely pure. It is free of ulterior motives. There is no power game. The man is not taking and the woman is not giving." This frank discussion of female sexual desire would have been unthinkable just decades earlier. Meanwhile, LGBTQ+ literature was fighting its own battles. Patricia Highsmith had to publish The Price of Salt under a pseudonym in 1952. Today, books like Alice Oseman's Heartstopper celebrate queer teen romance and top bestseller lists. The transformation is striking, from coded language and subtle hints to open celebration, from pulp fiction to literary acclaim. But these challenges in literature didn't happen in isolation. They reflected and sometimes drove profound shifts in how society views sexuality, relationships, and identity. In the 1950s, television shows couldn't show married couples sharing a bed. I used to wonder why, whenever I watched classic Nick at Night shows, couples always slept in separate twin beds. Now I know that it was a censorship thing. The word pregnant was considered too explicit for broadcast. Same sex relationships were criminalized. Divorce carried deep social stigma. These weren't just rules about entertainment, they were reflections of rigid social control over personal life and expression. To understand how we got here, we need to go back, way back. The taboo around sexuality isn't natural or universal, it's constructed, and its roots run deep in Western society. Ancient civilizations often had remarkably different attitudes towards sexuality. Greek and Roman art openly depicted erotic themes. Hindu temples featured explicit sculptures. Japanese shunga art celebrated sexuality in woodblock prints. Many indigenous cultures approached sexuality with openness rather than shame. The transformation began with the rise of medieval Christianity in Europe. The church became the primary authority on morality, and its interpretation of sexuality as inherently sinful, except within strict boundaries, became deeply embedded in Western culture. The Victorian era then codified these religious views into rigid social rules. This wasn't just about morality, it was about control. The same period that saw the rise of sexual repression also saw the rise of industrial capitalism, urbanization, and new forms of social control. Doctors invented diseases like female hysteria. Fashion required covering everything from necks to ankles. Even piano legs were covered for being too suggestive. This wasn't just prudishness, it was a systematic attempt to control bodies and behavior. Now, let's track how these attitudes began to crack. In the 1920s, we saw the flapper movement challenged feminine modesty. Women began wearing pants and shorter skirts. Birth control activism began with Margaret Sanger, and Freud's theories sparked public discussion of sexuality. From the 1930s to the 1940s, Hollywood's pre-code era showed surprising sexual freedom, but then the Hays Code restricted film content for decades afterwards. Pin-up culture during World War II shifted attitudes about female sexuality, and Kinsey began his groundbreaking research on human sexuality. In the 1950s, we saw Playboy magazine launch, which brought sexuality into mainstream media. Rock and roll music sparked moral panic about teenage sexuality. Sexology research continued despite social resistance, and the first lesbian rights organization, Daughters of Bilitis, formed. In the 1960s, we saw the birth control pill became widely available. The sexual revolution began. Stonewall riots launched the modern LGBTQ plus rights movement, and the feminine mystique challenged traditional gender roles. In the 1970s, Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. The gay rights movement gained momentum. Title IX passed, promoting gender equality, and we saw the first LGBT pride marches. In the 1980s and 90s, the AIDS crisis both stigmatized and mobilized communities. MTV pushed boundaries of sexual expression in media. Third wave feminism embraced sexual empowerment. The internet began transforming access to information and community. And in the 2000s to 2010s, social media transformed dating and relationships. Same-sex marriage gained legal recognition. Dating apps normalized online connections. And the Me Too movement sparked global conversations about consent. Today, Gen Z shows an unprecedented acceptance of sexual and gender diversity. Polyamory and ethical non-monogamy enter mainstream discussion. Transgender rights become a major civil rights issue, and sex work decriminalization movements gain traction. The transformation now appears in everyday life. TV shows feature diverse relationships and family structures. Sex education includes consent and LGBTQ plus topics. Dating apps cater to various orientations and relationship styles. Workplace policies address sexual harassment and discrimination. Pride celebrations draw mainstream corporate sponsorship. Sexual health products appear in regular advertising. Public figures openly discuss sexuality and relationships. parents discuss gender and sexuality with children earlier. Yet, this evolution hasn't been simple or universal. While younger generations tend to be more accepting of sexual diversity and expression, significant generational and cultural divides remain. The same forces driving book challenges often resist broader social changes around sexuality and gender. The digital revolution also brought about great change. When 50 Shades of Grey emerged from fan fiction to become a global phenomenon, it didn't just break sales records, it broke barriers about what could be openly discussed in mainstream literature. The digital age hasn't just changed how we publish books, it's transformed how we discuss sexuality and relationships entirely. Social media influencers openly discuss topics that would have been unthinkable on public platforms just decades ago. Sex education content creators reach millions. Dating and relationship advice flourishes on TikTok and Instagram. This democratization of discussion has profound implications. Teenagers questioning their identity can find community online. People in conservative regions can access information and support. Marginalized voices and experiences gain platforms. The conversation has moved from whispers to hashtags, yet this openness has also sparked backlash. The same digital tools that spread sex-positive messages also facilitate organized resistance. Social media algorithms can amplify both sexual liberation and sexual panic. The same platforms hosting LGBTQ plus youth support groups also spread misinformation about gender and sexuality. But perhaps more importantly, it demonstrated how digital publishing had democratized access to all kinds of literature, bypassing traditional gatekeepers and their traditional restrictions. But just as we might think these battles are behind us, we find ourselves in a new era of book challenges. The last few years have seen an unprecedented surge in attempts to remove books from schools and libraries across America. Books like Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, and The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison have found themselves at the center of these new censorship battles. The parallels to historical censorship are striking. Just as Lady Chatterley's Lover was once considered too dangerous for the public, these books are now labeled as threats to young readers. But there's a key difference. While historical censorship often came from centralized authorities, today's challenges frequently emerge from organized local groups targeting school boards and library systems. Social media amplifies these efforts, turning local disputes into national campaigns. And now the impact is real. Librarians report self-censoring their collections to avoid controversy. Teachers describe removing books from their classrooms. Some public libraries have even lost funding over refusing to remove challenged books. Yet this new wave of censorship has met fierce resistance. Organizations like PEN America, the American Library Association, and countless local groups fight to keep books on shelves. Banned book clubs have sprung up nationwide. Some bookstores even give away challenged books for free. Today, we face new questions. Content warnings have largely replaced official censorship in publishing, reflecting a society that prioritizes informed choice over blanket restrictions. Yet these new challenges show how debates about literary freedom evolve but never truly end. What's changed isn't just what we allow in books. It's how we talk about them, how we share them, and how we decide what has value. The evolution of literary censorship tells us something profound about human society. Each generation's scandals become the next generation's classics. What shocked our grandparents barely raises an eyebrow today. But perhaps most importantly, this evolution shows us that literature, at its best, pushes boundaries. It challenges us to think differently, to see the world through other eyes, to grow beyond our comfortable assumptions. From Flaubert to 50 Shades, from banned books to bestsellers, this journey reflects our own evolution as readers, as writers, and as a society. The question that we ask about books are really questions about ourselves, what we value, what we fear, and what we're ready to understand. Because in the end, every banned book tells two stories, the one written on its pages and the one written in our response to it. So now I would love to hear from you. Does it matter to you that social media platforms like Book Talk, Bookstagram, and BookTube promote a lot of spicy novels? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. And if you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to see more of my book reviews. Until next time, happy reading and see you soon. Bye!